Good morning, everybody. Just to add to what Professor Ela said a little while ago, I also feel that liver transplantation is a very pure science. It's almost as pure as mathematics. If you think you have done something wrong, it is surely going to come up, blow into your face, and haunt you for a number of days, weeks, months, and years to come. Without much ado, liver transplantation became a standard of care for patients with end-stage liver disease by early 1980s. Before that, it was still considered to be experimental, primarily because of dismal results of liver transplantation in the late 60s and 70s. The AASLD recognized it to be the definitive treatment for patients with end-stage liver disease. Now, unlike end-stage renal disease, there is no objective definition of end-stage liver disease. I often say that end-stage liver disease is the stage of chronic liver disease which have gone beyond the paradigm of medical management. So either your treatment is not working, or your treatment is producing side effects which are unacceptable, or both, and it is reflecting in both sickness as well as quality of life. So we really do not have a very firm definition of ESLD, but that is how I often talk about ESLD to my patients. So whenever we are talking about liver transplantation, here we are dealing with a scarce resource, which is the organs, and huge number of patients who need these organs. So even in the largest programs in this world, there is a huge mismatch between the people who need a transplant and those who ultimately give it. So that is why the prioritization for liver transplantation is based on the principles outlined in this slide. One is the medical urgency. That means if I do not transplant, the patient is going to die. And this is what most of the commonly used scores address. The second is utility. Here you are answering the question that after transplant, I will have a positive outcome. And most of the currently used scores do not use it except for the UKL, which I will be talking about in a little while. And last but not the least is the transplant benefit. That means I should be able to shorten or completely do away with the mortality on the waiting list, as well have a positive outcome after transplant. And to add to both the second and third concepts are also the donor related factors, because often they don't find a place or mention in assessment of the patients who need a transplant. So if the donor organ is not of good quality, then obviously you are not going to be able to do a good job no matter what you do. So the prioritization or allocation of organs over the periods of the last 2.5 decades has evolved from the minimal listing criteria, which were very basic. They just suggested that yes, you need to have decompensated chronic liver disease or any complication of chronic liver disease in the form of a spontaneous bacterial peritonitis or a GI bleed. However, these were too primitive and too subjective, and therefore these were done away with in the 80s. Most of the 90s and early part of this century, we saw the UNOS classification. So this classification was in vogue for a good more than 1 decade. It was based on the Child-Pugh scores. As we all know, these are categoric scores. So you have Child-Pugh classes A, B, and C. These also have an element of subjectivity in the sense that the severity of ascites and hepatic encephalopathy is assessed in a subjective manner, and 3 other objective parameters in the form of albumin, INR, and bilirubin. However, it also suffers from what is called as the ceiling effect. So if your bilirubin is 3.5 or 13.5, you get the same score. It also suffers from what is called as the floor effect. If your albumin is 2.8 or it is 1.5, you get the same score. Plus also the time you have accrued on the waiting list decides when you will get an organ. So there could be 2 patients with in the same category, and then they would be getting the organ only based on the number of months or years spent on the waiting list. So clearly there were flaws in this program, and there were patients who were sick and who were dying on the waiting list. So all of this was replaced by what we use most often nowadays, which is the MELD score. It started off as the Mayo End Stage Liver Disease score. Initially it was used to assess or prognosticate patients who underwent a TIPS shunt, but later on it was seen that regardless of the etiology of cirrhosis or complications of portal hypertension in the form of SBP or encephalopathy or variceal bleed or hepatorenal syndrome, you could come out with a score which is going to tell you your short-term mortality. So mind you, it was first projected for the 3-month mortality or 90 days mortality. On this slide you see the scores, and this is the 3-month mortality which these patients have. There are some inherent flaws in this score because it's all logarithmic calculation. So if you have a creatinine less than 1, you can have a negative value. And also this score was capped at 40, and that is where the problems crept in the score. But this is the score which most institutions follow nowadays. The advantages of this model is that it's a completely objective model. It's a statistical model. It has reached the bedside because there is a MELD calculator which is available online, and all of us are used to expressing any patient's severity of liver disease as the MELD score. It has been validated across different etiologies of liver disease. It has been validated across different geographical regions of the world, and it has held its ground. And since its adoption, most importantly, at least in the US, there have been fewer registrations for liver transplant. So you know that you cannot have an exercise in futility by registering your patient when his MELD score is very, very low. Also, the waitlist mortality has declined. And it was initially believed that because we are going to transplant patients who are sick, who need an urgent transplant, maybe their post-transplant outcomes will be inferior. But surprisingly, that was not the case. So that is the most important strength of this score, and effectively the post-liver transplant survival has remained the same from the UNOS era. And this is very well projected from the UNOS database, at least till 2007. The number of days on the waiting list has declined, as well as in the pre-MELD era when we were using the UNOS classification, and in the post-MELD era, the number of deaths per 100 patient years has come down, per 1000 patient years has come down dramatically. So this is the score that we use most of the times in our current day practice. The disadvantages of MELD, however, are inter-lab variability. So you will not have the same kind of INR value from any two labs. We have problems with serum creatinine. We know that liver disease patients' serum creatinine is not a good reflection of their glomerular filtration rate. Quite a bit of creatinine is excreted into the tubules. So some equations have replaced it either with not estimated but measured GFR, or some have replaced it with cystatin C, but most equations still follow creatinine only in the MELD score. There have been potential problems with serum bilirubin also, because there are certain liver diseases in which the bilirubin is elevated but renal function is preserved, especially cholestatic liver diseases. So these patients will have a falsely low MELD score, and therefore they will be not prioritized on the waiting list. Problems have also been there with the INR, which we know was first used only to assess the efficacy of anticoagulations in patients who are on warfarin. So we do not have a truly liver kind of INR. So there are problems inherent to the score, but then again this is the score which has stood its ground and the test of time. Because of this, there have been various modifications to the MELD score, and they are outlined in this. So for those patients who have got a low MELD score, low calculated MELD of less than 21, if you add sodium to it, then you get a better C statistic or concordance statistics to tell you that this patient has got a higher chance of dying. And from the UNOS database, it has been shown that when your sodium drops from 135, with every 1 milliequivalent per liter drop in sodium, your mortality over 3 months increases by 1.05. So sodium has got a very important prognostic value in patients with advanced liver disease. So you have an integrated MED score where you also include the age and sodium, and then the UKL score. All these scores were only validated retrospectively except for the UKL score. So when this score was devised in the US between 2000, in the UK between 2006 and published in 2008, it was first tested on a validation cohort and then tested on a test cohort prospectively. And it was shown that if you have a UKL of more than 49, then only you list your patients for transplantation. And then and this basically means that you have got a more than 10% chance of dying in the next 1 year, which is more than your mortality due to the liver transplantation, and that is why transplantation should be offered to you. Female gender is negatively affected by the stratification of MELD because they have got lower body mass index. They also have low creatinine values, and same creatinine they will have a lower GFR than males. So you have a MELD gender, and then you have a reweighted MELD where you add 1 before the creatinine, so that what I just described a little while ago, that a creatinine of 0.7 cannot be the same as creatinine of 1 in a liver disease patient. So if you have a reweighted MELD, then that also has been shown to have a better C statistic than MELD alone. But mind you, all of these have originated from the original MELD score only, and that is the strength of that score. There are certain MELD exceptions. That means there are certain chronic liver diseases which are not well stratified according to the MELD score, and they are outlined in this slide, which is not a completely exhaustive slide. Important amongst these are the first 3 categories. So if you ask me a simple question, what is the commonest indication of liver transplantation in our country? It is refractory ascites. Those of these patients who are managed well, they will always have low MELD score, because we stop their diuretics, we try to preserve their sodium, we try to preserve their creatinine, and generally they will be low MELDers. But they will have a terrible quality of life. They will need large volume paracentesis from time to time. They might develop hepatic hydrothorax. They might develop spontaneous bacterial peritonitis, might develop renal shutdown, and all of these, when they get better, are not reflected in the MELD score. So there are potential problems with the MELD score, but they need to be addressed. In the US, all these cases are presented in a subjective manner to the regional review boards, or the RRBs as we call them. But in our country, of course, because we do not have a nationwide waiting list, most programs run at an individual level, so we really do not care too much about this. But then this is extremely important once we evolve into a similar kind of program that exists in the Western world, and we have a uniform waiting list in our country too. Some of the other common indications are hepatopulmonary syndrome, portal pulmonary syndrome, FAP is less common in our countries, polycystic liver disease, and recurrent cholangitis. So patients who have got primary sclerosing cholangitis and they have recurrent bouts of cholangitis, they need extra MELD points to be able to get a liver transplantation. Coming to how best we can utilize these organs. Now I definitely want to tell this audience that in our country, most of the transplants happen in the live donor setting. In the Western world, most of the transplants happen in the deceased donor setting. And most of the published literature is from the deceased donor setting. So can we translate that into our practice? That is what I will try to address in the next few slides. So this is the data for more than 12,000 patients from the UNOS database between 2001-2003. We know that MELD came into existence in February of 2012. Now what does this important slide show? So this is the hazard ratio of you dying when you have got a MELD score between 6 to 14. So there is a much higher chance of dying after transplant than remaining on the waiting list. So this gave rise to what is called as the Share 15 policy. So that means if you have got a MELD score of less than 14 and you have an organ which is available locally, it will not be given to you, it will be shared in the region for someone who's got a MELD score of 15 or higher. So only at a MELD score of 15 the hazard ratio touches 1. And this is what is shown over here, the waiting list mortality and post-transplant mortality. So your post-transplant mortality is high when you have got a low MELD score and you get a transplant done. And probably this has got to do with the deceased donor setting more than anything, because into this entire equation comes the quality of the donor organ, and that is reflected in what we call as the donor risk index, or DRI. If time permits, we can discuss about that. So if your donor organ quality is not good, then if you get transplanted with the low MELD, you are likely to do much worse than remaining on the waiting list. So what we tell our patients is that they must earn their transplant, and this is the principle by which our transplant community, even though we do more live donor transplants, must stick to and adhere to. The second question is, should MELD be capped? So it was suggested that beyond 40, you should not have a MELD score. But see what the UNOS database shows. More than 52,000 patients who need a transplant who are waitlisted over a long period of time, and even though the number of patients who have got a MELD score of more than 40 is very small at any given point of time, it is just about 2 to 2.5% of the entire cohort, but their mortality is much higher. So the reference is status 1A, which are the patients with fulminant liver failure. And if you consider this to be the reference, you can see that the mortality in patients who've got a MELD more than 40 is much higher. So probably these are patients who are more likely to die than even the status 1A patients. Mind you, status 1A means that this patient has got a high chance of dying in the next 24 hours. So probably we have to relook at MELD being capped at 40. So next important contentious issue is the MELD for hepatocellular carcinoma. So over the decades, surgeons have been very comfortable, and mind my saying that I know there are many surgeons and many eminent ones too in this audience, have been very comfortable transplanting patients with hepatocellular carcinoma. Many of these patients have got well preserved liver function. They are probably easy to operate on patients, and I think all programs have evolved from that phase when you produce very good results by transplanting these patients. So initially the Milan's criteria from 1996, Mazzaferro's paper, saying that single tumor nodules or 3 nodules each less than 3 centimeters should be transplanted. These were too restrictive criteria because based on primitive imaging in the 90s, replaced by the explant criteria of UCSF, single lesion 6.5 centimeters, or if you have 3 nodules, the largest one should not be more than 4.5 centimeter, and total tumor diameter should just be about 8 centimeter. And more recently, a less restrictive criteria which takes into consideration the size of the tumors as well as the number of tumors. Initially in the United States, patients with HCC, they used to be sadly advantaged by this policy. So in 2002, patients with T1 lesions less than 2 centimeters used to get 24 points. Those with lesions between 2 to 5 centimeters used to get 29 points. And every 3 months, these points would be increased by 10%. And then they found that in some programs, almost 60 to 80% of transplants were being done for HCC, which was basically bad for the other patients who were waitlisted. In recent times, the T1 lesions do not get any additional points, and T2 lesions get 22 points. And then every 3 months, these points are reviewed. That probably is a much better policy. In certain parts of Europe, they have added this to the MELD score, and every month they get an increment of 0.5 or 1 point depending on their underlying liver disease. And indeed, this was proven on the database analysis between 2005 and 9 when the new policy came into place. Look at what happens at various MELD ranges. So patients who have got HCC, chances of dying or becoming too sick for transplant is always more in non-HCC patients. So these patients were being transplanted when there were other sicker patients on the waiting list who would die because of their progression of liver disease. So the people who were for the pro-HCC approach said that there will be a dropout rate because the tumor will progress or their liver disease will progress. But we know that there are excellent downstaging measures, and these probably should also hold their ground in the live donor programs. Many of us are in a tearing hurry to transplant our patients, especially when they have got high AFP scores. Even if they are well within the Milan's criteria, the approach that we follow in our hospital and our program is that you should first try to downstage the tumor, must demonstrate that the alpha fetoprotein has declined, and then only consider these patients for transplantation. And this is also true for patients who have got a much more advanced disease. And indeed it was seen, and these are the data from the A2ALL, adult to adult live donor transplantation, that patients who were transplanted in the live donor, and that is why I make this point very vehemently before this audience, because we do predominantly live donor transplants, the results are inferior with respect to HCC compared to the deceased donor program. And the analyses showed that these patients had much more widespread disease, higher number of nodules, they had fewer sessions of downstaging, and they are higher alpha fetoprotein values, and probably that is why the biological behavior of the tumor was not studied properly or was not expressed properly before transplant, and that is why the deceased donor did very well. Now coming to the last 3 slides, because again at the expense of repeating myself, we are predominantly live donor program. So let us try to understand from literature what happens when you have both programs in place, which is what I think should be the vision for this country. So this is from the pre-MELD era, only 2 centers, University of Columbia and North Carolina, small number of patients. So these are the patients who say that they have got a live donor available, see what happens to them. So those who do not have a live donor and those who have a live donor, those who have a live donor, they get transplanted more frequently, and they also have got a much better Kaplan-Meier curve for survival if the wait time is more than 6 months. So up until 6 months, when you have got low MELD scores at the time of listing, you will do much better if you have got a live donor. So mind you, here the MELD at transplant is just 12, and wait list mortality for those who have a live donor is much lower than those who do not have a live donor. Second is again the results of A2ALL in a slightly more detailed fashion. Again, these are people who are in 9 programs in the US, again between this period 2002-2009, follow-up of 4.6 years, and those who had got a MELD of less than 15 and those who had a MELD of more than 15. So this is basically to counter my previous argument that those with MELD less than 15 should not be transplanted. What was seen? When you have a MELD score of less than 15, time to get an organ is 3 months if you have a live donor, 7.9 months if you get a deceased donor, and you have a less chance of dying on the waiting list as compared to those who have got a MELD of 15. When it comes to MELD of 15 or more, again live donors get transplanted sooner than those who have got a deceased donor organ. So these are patients who do not have a HCC. So you can see here that if your waiting period is about 7 to 8 months, then LDLT is as good as DDLT. But if your time on waiting list is more, then more patients with high MELD score, they will die. Again the same curves, and here again you can see that the hazard ratio for less than 15 is also very good. So almost 61% chance that you will not die if you have a live donor program. So this is counterintuitive to what I said a little while ago, and it was also answered by me a little while ago, because we do not consider into this equation the characteristics of the donor organ. So if the donor organ is good, then maybe you are well within your rights to transplant people who've got a MELD of less than 15, but mind you, your patient should definitely have earned his transplant. When you analyze these data further, you can see that across all MELD ranges, patients who have got an LDLT have done better with respect to survival. But at least in the low MELD and very high MELD, the 95% confidence interval crosses 1. Those with HCC again get the organs very quickly, and maybe these results would have been different in the post-2005 era. So to summarize, ladies and gentlemen, MELD has been possibly the most talked about and written about scores in contemporary hepatology practice. It has shown its versatility not only for organ allocation, but also across diseases, including your outcomes after surgery, your risk to develop bacterial infections, your stay in the ICU, and whether you will survive ICU stay or not. So this is really a score which has stood its ground. All modifications which have come up because of the criticism of the initial MELD have again been the offshoots of the MELD only, which tell you that this score is really very robust. And no wonder that in the last decade, this liver transplantation has been christened as the MELD era. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Dharmesh Kapoor, for the excellent lecture. We shall take a few questions before we move to the next topic. Questions from the audience, please.
So now you're talking about the hepatocellular carcinoma patients. So in hepatocellular carcinoma, we are all using the Milan's criteria, and most of the organ allocation policies are also using the Milan's criteria. The important concept is, if somebody has got a secretory status, that means they have got a high alpha fetoprotein. In these patients, even if you have a tumor which is well within the Milan's criteria, just because there is a donor available, I think we should understand the biological behavior of the tumor. In the initial Milan series, 5-year survival was 70% and recurrence rate was just about 10%. But the biological nature of disease might be very different in this part of the world. So I think we should look to downstage these tumors. You have a donor available. Many of these patients have got well-preserved liver function. Mind you, this can happen only if your patient has got well-preserved liver function. If your patient is decompensated, high bilirubin, ascites, you cannot do any of the downstage procedure. So in that category of patients, it makes sense to see if the AFP comes down. If the AFP doesn't come down, and some people have also noted what is called as the alpha fetoprotein slope. Some people have said that look at the trend of AFP. If it continues not to fall over successive months by 15 nanogram per ml, then this is a disease that you are underestimating. So this way you will be able to address the issue of recurrence much better after transplant. Yeah, in our hands we do TACE more often than anything else. But for smaller lesions, RFA is equally effective. Then we cannot assess. Some of us have used PIVCA. It is not very easily available. We know that if the PIVCA values are high, more than 40, and you have somebody who's got a non-secretory status with respect to AFP, again you should look for disease elsewhere or try to study the biological behavior.
I think we need to conclude. Can I just say a few words to conclude? So I think the reason I put this talk is to show people that not all patients who've got liver disease or all patients dying of transplantation need to transplant. You didn't cover the extreme end of probably when not to transplant. I think
we are going to have a case on that.
Different meeting there. And also I want to impress upon, transplanting early is sometimes a disaster. It's very clear from the Western world, particularly if patients are doing very well and you give them a marginal organ and they suffer post-operatively and they will never pardon you. In our country it's the same. I always say to patients when they come early because they've been suggested that they need a transplant, go away and come back and see us every 6 months. Because they need to earn the transplant. They need to know that they are sick enough for them to know the transplant. Sometimes even the blood test may show that that's not looking so good. I always feel that the patient should demand the transplant. I can give you an example of what happened nearly 20 years ago in King's. There was a patient with PBC whose only problem was intense lethargy. I think intense lethargy is an accepted indication for transplantation even though she had a very low MELD. We transplanted her, she had severe rejection, She went on to chronic rejection. She suffered so much more after her transplant, and we did a retransplant on her, and then she got through. So she went through hell, and if you asked her after the transplant, was it the right decision to have a transplant, she said it wouldn't have been. And the issue is, if these patients actually die after transplant, it's such a disaster for the family. So it's very important that when we offer transplantation for patients, they really need it and they deserve it. And the first few points that you made, that when patients are low MELD, the risk of them dying of transplantation becomes higher than the risk of them dying on a waiting list. So I just want people to take this into consideration before you offer transplantation, particularly on the near end of the spectrum where patients are looking reasonably well. I think we should move on.
Thank you, Dr.